Let me read it again. The ranchers, the wonderful ranchers, are in violation of the Clean Water Act, the National Environmental Policy Act, the Point Reyes Enabling Legislation, and the Organic Act of 1916. Well, by all means, let's keep them there for their environmental services. You are saying that the people who are violating all of these environmental acts are the people who need to stay for the sake of the environment. I should have opened up with that. I'm out here surveying the historical damage done by ranching operations and walking through a sea of invasive fire fuel brought here by ranchers to California from another continent. And it seems like a great time to start a new series on this channel. We're going to start exposing all of these people who intentionally spread lies, particularly in Marin County.
And our first subject is Judy Teichman of Point Reyes Station. Judy actually has a history acting as an attorney for the ranchers, and she opposed shutting down Drake's Bay Oyster Company inside the seashore and has written into many publications many times in a very biased manner supporting the ranchers.
I wonder if we should question what she says, considering her close ties with the ranchers. Well, obviously the Point Reyes Light didn't question it. They will publish any lie that anyone sends in if it's on behalf of the ranchers. The same is true for the Marin Independent Journal. All right, enough build-up. Let's get into this. Let's read what Judy sent into the Point Reyes Light, and they were happy to print. Quote, if the park negotiates with the ranchers to leave, who will perform the environmental services they provide in the normal course of ranching? I couldn't even get through a sentence. Environmental services. Okay. And of course, I guess we're going to have to look at this from the perspective of ranchers who have created their own environment, which replaced the natural, healthy environment.
Because there are so many newcomers to this topic, I have to point out that what I'm showing you is honestly inside of a national park. This is what ranchers did to what was once natural habitat inside of a national park. This is what Judy is fighting for. This is what she's calling environmental services. Basically, Judy doesn't want that green native habitat to ever come back. This is inside the elk reserve, and what you're looking at beyond that is ranch land. Don't ever let this death turn into life. That's basically what Judy is saying.
Let's read about these services. Quote, these include maintaining stock ponds, which are sources of water for wildlife. Do I dare stop again already? The ranchers complain about wildlife drinking their cattle's water. The ranchers are allowed to provide water to their livestock while wildlife who don't have water are allowed to die. The ranchers have troughs. They have stock ponds. Their cattle drink from the natural water sources, which they shouldn't be. The cattle destroy nature's water sources, trample it, defecate in it, cause erosion inside of it, sedimentation inside of the natural water sources. But the most important point here is that the ranchers actively complain and use the excuse of the elk drinking and eating things that the ranchers say belong to the cattle as an excuse to kill and or remove the elk. And yet, the stock ponds. By the way, what would be so hard about, if you are in fact concerned about the elk, what would be so hard about continuing to put water into those stock ponds? If you're the National Park Service and you actually care about the service that stock ponds provide, what do you have, an obligation to fill those in? You probably should just start fresh because they are cesspools of cow manure. Somehow the next sentence is even better.
Since the park's early invasive species detection program is not able to survey most ranch areas. Wow, I could stop right there. Let me finish the sentence though. Having the ranchers watch for new invasives and map and manage certain park infestations is another service, according to the park's own reports. Okay. Wow. Anyone who's buying this, sorry, I'm trying to be a little bit more polite. Okay. Not able to survey most ranch areas. That's interesting, because if you come out and criticize the Park Service, they will brag about their active monitoring and how close of an eye they have on everything taking place out there. Not able to. Let's just rephrase that for what it really is. Unwilling to condemn the ranchers for the damage that they are causing on their ranch lands. Because you know what the ranch lands are? The ranch lands are a mosaic of invasive species. It's a nice little variety pack of invasive species. By the way, invasive species that can be traced back to the origins of these proud families who brought over these things from Europe and from the Mediterranean. We're talking about plants and animals that don't even belong on this continent. But the very people responsible for this problem are going to be the active alert system? No, they are the reason that those plants are there. And not only that, it's not just historical and accidental and something that is carrying over from the past. They are still currently intentionally growing those plants. Like, they don't want the thistles, but the thistles came along anyway. But the silage fields, that's intentional. The grasses, they're not planting native grasses. The ranchers are not planting native grasses. I've walked through the ranch fields. I walked through the ranch fields with ecologist Laura Cunningham, and every time we stopped over and identified plants, not one is native. You know where you have to go to find native plants? Outside of the ranch lands. And unfortunately, the negative effect of the ranches is seeping over into the rest of the park. Actually, that happened a long time ago, and the Park Service is supposed to be actively undoing that damage. Now, I ask you, how is that ever going to happen when the Park Service supports the people who are continuing to intentionally introduce invasive species? I hope the phone microphone picked that up.
I actually got to see a coyote earlier that morning. I'll share a couple of seconds of it with you. Look how well he blends in. Okay, back to the reading.
Watch for new invasives and map and manage certain park infestations. I got to tell you, if the Park Service isn't doing that, then they are failing at their jobs. You know why? Because the Park Service is busy setting up new fences for the ranchers, putting out new troughs for the ranchers, defending to the public how important the ranchers are. Oh my God. Most importantly, who will manage grazing going forward? Oh, Judy. And oh, every single one of you who nodded your heads in agreement when you read that. Why would you need to manage grazing going forward if the ranchers are gone? Why would you need to manage grazing if the ranchers are gone? Oh, you know what would happen? You know what could happen is that these endangered and threatened native species that we're supposed to care so much about could have land to go and graze upon instead of being restrained behind a prison inside of a national park. Maybe you could allow the wildlife to grow and flourish. And I remember Melanie Gunn saying, oh no, we've got to kill the elk because they might outgrow the number that is manageable. Right. How many years down the road will that be? How many years down the road will it be before the elk even come close to numbering the number of cattle that are currently in Point Reyes National Seashore? Let's worry right now that the elk might actually flourish. God forbid that the native animals actually flourish in the national park. And let's tolerate, what is it, 8,000, 9,000 destructive, non-native bovines? Let's tolerate that and put our concern in what might happen if we actually allowed nature to take its course. Oh, okay. The park analyzed the impact of removing all cattle and concluded that elimination of livestock grazing would have widespread ecological impacts from the removal of the primary disturbance regime that has been present for more than 150 years, and the park would not be able to mitigate these impacts across the entire planning area. Okay, let's stop with the phrase ecological impacts, because what she's talking about here, or at least Judy is trying to make it sound like, it would be a negative thing if the Park Service couldn't interfere with nature recovering. This is what ranch people want. Their heads are so far up their own asses that they think it's important to maintain these fields of non-native invasive plants because of the historical connection to the ranchers that were out there who destroyed nature in order to bring in their own commodity crops and commodity animals. Anyone who thinks that that is a necessary or important historical reference point to be able to go out there and look at that, are you blindfolded the entire time that you're driving through California on your way to Point Reyes National Seashore? That's what almost all of California looks like. That's what 50% of the United States of America looks like. We do not need to maintain the unhealthy, invasive plants in the pastoral zone in Point Reyes National Seashore. It's negative. Do you understand? It's negative.
Let me explain the shot that you just saw. This is ranch land. You can just barely make out the elk fence in the background. Now, this is what the ranchers do intentionally. They just wipe out everything, and then they try to quickly regrow stuff. They're not regrowing natives. And even if they were, the fact that they kill them in an annual harvest or feed them to their livestock would negate any positives. But what's happening here, you have some early season weeds that have already busted through, but that weird sort of grayish color, well, that is a hardened layer of liquefied poop that was sprayed over the land. And that's in addition to the dry manure they spread, and that's in addition to the cows pooping directly on the ground. You know, just the way nature does, an absolute saturation of feces covering everything. And you know what happens here is that the nitrogen-loving weeds that grow back quickly and the cows can graze on like all of that poop. It's not healthy, it's not nature, but it does benefit the ranchers in a very short-sighted way. This is the pastoral zone that Judy is talking about, that Judy is advocating for, that Judy is saying is important to maintain and preserve for environmental services. It makes you wonder if people like Judy have even been to Point Reyes National Seashore. And if you have, that means you're lying intentionally. Lying intentionally or lying out of naivety, which one's worse?
Oh, thank you. And this is why I'm starting to read these things, because these people provide all the ammunition that I could ever want. Continuing, the park's documents state over time, formerly grazed lands would likely convert to shrub or forest habitats. God forbid. We wouldn't want the invasive plants to go away and be replaced by native vegetation. You know how wildlife hate shrubs and hate trees. Holy crap, that would just be terrible. This is going to adversely affect wildlife, huh? Okay. Species dependent upon grassland habitats: burrowing owl, grasshopper, sparrow, and tricolored blackbird. Okay. If grasslands are a priority, if you actually care about these animals, then the Park Service can finally do a native grassland restoration program and use the land that the ranchers are hypothetically vacating and put in native grasses, which, by the way, are self-managing. You won't have to reseed every year and all of this crap. They're perennials. They'll actually have deep roots that can actually sequester carbon. They'll actually survive native grazers, because native grazers don't eat the way that destructive livestock do. The Park Service has the nerve to have on their website the concern over only 1%, maybe 2% of California's coastal grasslands still remain. And yet, what have they done to restore them? No, they defended the ranchers who, in fact, stand in the way of that progress because of the importance of keeping non-native, destructive livestock on non-native, ugly grazing ground. That's what the pastoral zone is. It's a bunch of invasive plants, non-native plants, and non-native commodity animals. And you want to prioritize that over restoration of a badly needed native grassland. If you actually care about native animals, give them the native grasses that they were designed to live with, not the bullshit that the ranchers have brought in. By the way, if in fact nature is going to come back with shrubbery and trees, there's a pretty good chance that that's what's supposed to happen. Stop pretending like you know better than nature does. If there is a natural inclination for those shrubs, maybe they're talking about coyote brush or something of that sort. If there's a natural inclination for recovery of some sort to take place there, maybe that's what's supposed to happen, and you need to back off.
Occasionally, non-California ranchers see these videos and comment and get offended. Okay, not everybody ranches like this. But I'm asking you guys a question. When you look at this, do you not see overly grazed, abused land? This is California coastal prairie. This was inside of a biodiversity hotspot, and they abused it so badly that it's turned into this. What do you call that? You know, do you do this to your own land? I'm guessing most ranchers nowadays understand why you shouldn't do this, but these guys are basically living rent-free in a national park on our dime, and this is the behavior of people like that. There aren't really any consequences for them. They just abuse the land and then get praised for it.
It's just amazing to me how these people pretend to care about the wildlife all of a sudden. They're just being manipulative. They're using fake concern for wildlife to argue to keep in people whose very industry is anti-wildlife. I just saw an owl. Maybe I'll put the clip up. Have you ever gone through a pastoral zone, a grazing area, and seen what cattle do? Anything that tries to burrow there, their burrow will be destroyed. Anything that tries to nest there, their nest will be destroyed. Reminds me of the silage fields. Is that the type of wonderful habitat you're talking about, where the animals who desperately need habitat so badly end up trying to nest inside of the silage fields only to pay the price of being chopped up in the mower blades? Is that the type of wonderful habitat you're talking about, Judy? No, she's talking about providing a pastoral zone of invasive grasses that the cattle stomp through. But I had to throw in the silage fields because that's a pretty horrific thing that happens out there. Oh, an alert for invasive species. I wonder if the Park Service has noticed the incredible increase in the number of ravens. and the undeniable association of those ravens with ranches. Where's the early detection there? No, we're just going to overlook that. You know the detrimental impact that all of these ravens are having on other species out there, other birds that they kill off, but not just that. Obviously, they're consuming other potential food sources that native animals would like to have there. And it's not that I'm against the ravens, but the existence of the ranches have allowed that population to grow out of control and be a overly dominant species out there. Where is any action being taken on that? And in fact, there have been studies done telling the Park Service that it's a problem and that it is directly associated with the ranchers. And yet, I got to wonder if people like Judy have actually even gone into Point Reyes. If you've actually even walked out there and looked at the ranch land and seen the destruction caused by the ranchers before you say things like this. You know, it's easier to lie maybe if you haven't seen how absurd your lies are. But which one's worse? Someone who is willing to lie without knowing what they're talking about? So someone who is willing to spread disinformation, someone who's willing to spread their own ignorance, or someone who actually does know better and still chooses to lie? Which one's better? Ignorant lying? Intentional lying? Which brings us back to the Point Reyes light. How about organizations that publish those lies and allow these people to continue to spread their lies? Oh, and she talks about consulting Fish and Wildlife. Yeah, they're such a stand-up organization, such a good organization. You understand that that organization was founded by hunters and exists for hunters just because the people who arrived here, the same ranch people, the same ancestors of those ranch people who came over with this manifest destiny idea, were killing so many things so fast that there weren't going to be any left to kill later on. And so Wonderful Fish and Wildlife says, hey, don't quite kill everything yet, or you'll miss out on the fun of killing some more of them in the future. So we'll just keep them hanging on by a thread. We'll keep them hanging on by a thread so that you can still go out and kill them from time to time. It isn't just wildlife and plant species that will suffer if grazing ceases. The park's environmental impact report states emphatically, complete removal of grazing would also result in an increase in fuel loading and fire risk in the planning area. Well, that's just absurd. Again, so you're not going to allow native grazers to graze down the fuel load? Ladies and gentlemen, the fuel load, the danger, the problem that exists across California are the non-native annual, always dying, annual, always turning yellow, always dying, kindling that the non-native grasses are providing. So there are several things you could do here. You could do what I suggested earlier, replace that with the perennial native grasses that were meant to exist in a state that is prone to fire instead of these things, as you see right behind me. This right behind me was caused by ranching. These are not native, and they sure look like they want to burn, don't they? So, hey, let's keep the problem going. Let's keep fields of invasive plants out there because of a fake fear of fuel, fire fuel. I mean, that's the one that's just that's the card that they throw down, isn't it? Hey, you don't want your house to burn down. Hey, let's be afraid of fire. So let's throw that excuse in there at the end, and you can just ignore all common sense because fear will take over. Don't bring back the native grazers that desperately need that land in order to succeed as a species. Don't let them keep down the fuel load. Don't replace that fuel load with native grasslands that you're pretending on your own website, National Park Service, that you're worried about disappearing. Don't do that. You know, the amount of money it would cost, and I'm sure it would cost because native seeds are hard to come by for whatever reason. Whatever that amount of money is, wouldn't hold a candle to how much money it requires to keep these unsustainable ranches running out there in Point Reyes National Seashore. The park lacks the resources to prevent the negative impacts of removing ranching. Jesus, my God. I'm having a hard time not cussing here. Ranching is the negative impact that is taking place in Point Reyes National Seashore. And the Park Service are impaired from doing their jobs and actually helping that place get to where it should be because they are tied up in this political relationship with the ranchers in which they are forced to defend the very cause of the problems themselves. Not only defend them, but actually assist them in their day-to-day chores of destroying Point Reyes National Seashore. That entire Park Service staff needs to be removed when the ranchers leave. It's not realistic to expect the incoming federal administration to increase funding for it. Nope. It is realistic for the incoming administration to give these rich ranchers even more money and even more land to destroy. That's what's realistic. Bunch of Trumpsters, a bunch of planet-hating Trumpsters running Point Reyes National Seashore into the ground out there, and yet you call them stewards of the land. I'm pleased that someone at least has a draft letter that I'm going to read in response. We'll see if the Point Reyes Light publishes it, since they are blatantly biased in favor of the ranchers. Let me read this. In her letter to the Light on November 21st, Judy Teichman, whatever her name is, wonders why the National Park Service is not defending their controversial plan to continue ranching in Point Reyes National Seashore. Why, she wonders, is the Park Service involved in a plan to eliminate ranching on Point Reyes? Of course, Ms. Teichman, a retired lawyer who has represented peninsula ranchers, knows the answer. There we go again. Look at her ties with the ranchers. Should really make anything she says be questionable in your minds. Of course, she knows the answer. It's because that wildly unpopular plan to support the ranchers is legitimately challenged under the Clean Water Act, the National Environmental Policy Act, the Point Reyes Enabling Legislation. That's what I was referring to when I said it is, in fact, the park's job and responsibility to be restoring that place, not helping it stay in an invasive state for the sake of the ranchers. And the Organic Act of 1916. I've got to read that again, because you are saying that the people who are violating all of these environmental acts are the people who need to stay for the sake of the environment. I should have opened up with that. Maybe I'll put that at the beginning. Let me read it again. The ranchers, the wonderful ranchers, are in violation of the Clean Water Act, the National Environmental Policy Act, the Point Reyes Enabling Legislation, and the Organic Act of 1916. Well, by all means, let's keep them there for their environmental services. And the Organic Act of 1916, which established the National Park Service, according to Wilderness Watch, the elk fence violates the Wilderness Act, and the chronic trampling of the Abbott's dunes by escaped cows might just violate the Endangered Species Act. Well, it's all political, isn't it? It definitely violates any idea that you care about those animals, and the cattle themselves certainly violate those endangered species. Will the Park Service do anything about it? No, because this is politics, and guess who's holding the strings? Those poor, hardworking Americans out there that are just trying to get by. Nope, you mean the millionaires who own the politicians and the Park Service by means of owning the politicians. Such humble, hardworking, wonderful people out there. And this author is talking about what I talked about earlier. The cattle go and take water from the wildlife. They violate and trespass, and yet the concern by the ranchers is that wildlife occasionally come and drink some of their water. And yet Judy wants to pretend that the ranchers are happily providing for these wildlife, and if they go away, there's going to be problems for the wildlife. Judy, your ability to lie is frightening. I guess that's part of your ability to become a lawyer. But you're a bad person. You're a bad person. I don't care if you're an old woman. This is not the channel to come and listen to someone who gets sensitive. If you're a bad person, you're a bad person. And if you're an old lady and you're still acting like this, instead of at least toward the end of your life deciding, you know what, maybe I should do better, then double F you. Incidentally, the Point Reyes administration is also being sued under the Administrative Procedure Act and the Freedom of Information Act. Oh yes, the Freedom of Information Act. I've written in with my own requests. Several people have written in with their own requests. And the Park Service, despite being lawfully required to provide the information that was requested, keep dragging their feet. You know why? Because those documents reveal clearly how badly the ranchers violate every single thing that you want to turn around and claim they are good for. They are violators of all of the policies that I just read, of all the acts that I just read. They are bad. They are bad. They are bad. And Judy is telling you that they're good. People, go out there and look for yourselves. Stop being irresponsible. You want to mouth off? Go and look at the reality of Point Reyes. At least have the decency to go and look at the reality of Point Reyes instead of sitting there saying, oh yeah, the ranchers are very important. You know, the excuses for the problems of getting rid of the ranchers are the same today in 2024 as they were back when the ranchers fought the creation of the park. Same excuses. They can't possibly still be accurate, can't possibly still be true. But if you want to believe lies, the ability for people to believe lies is pretty, well, it's pretty phenomenal in and of itself. I had something else to share, and that's Judy's history with the Point Reyes light. She says, managing elk, this is back in May of 2024, managing elk and wilderness for fire prevention. Again, tapping into that old fear argument. How does managing the elk tie into the fire? Anyway, I'm not going to read these other ones. I think she might be the evil, vile piece of trash who said that it was fine for the elk to die because they reached their carry capacity. That sounds like her level of stupidity. Carry capacity. Judy, what you're calling carry capacity would be the equivalent of me locking you in your house, and when you run out of food, us saying, well, too bad, you reached your carry capacity. What else does she write in? July 19th, 2023. Managing parkland for both elk and ranching. Oh yeah, you guys remember the signs that were up in Point Reyes, and they finally took them down because they were so blatantly absurd. Elk fences now. Let's manage the park to be friendly for the elk and the cattle. It's only friendly to the cattle, people. Dairies are becoming an endangered species in Marin. Another one that she sent in. You know what the accurate title for that would have been? Dairies are the cause of endangered species in Marin. Oh my God. Okay. Wow. Shame on you, Judy. Shame on you, Point Reyes Light. Shame on you, Marin, not independent journal. The Point Reyes lie in the Marin, not independent, pro-cattle journal. Well, any of you talking trash, typing away, please, by all means, type it. Type your lies into the comments, just like you send in your lies to the Point Reyes Light, who are happy to print them. Because we have the evidence, we just don't have the politicians. And guess who has them?